Hello and welcome to my Genesis deck profile. So this is a deck I haven't actually put that much time into. I've been so busy with so many things, but I've had people asking for content, and of course we've got P-Clan Collection which just came out, so I'll just put out this other deck profile that I had worked on, which uses the new Stride. Personally, I'm leaning more on the Witch deck, but maybe someone might be able to develop this a little bit further. I haven't tried that many games with it, to be honest, but I'll just explain what some of the things you can do in this deck are. And so we'll start with the start, which is obviously the same old thing. Then we've got 4 copies of Himiko Reverse. So this is based around the Himiko Reverse theme, rather than based on the Witch theme. So the interesting thing about this card is that what you do is you defend yourself by basically counterblasting 1, and then you call a trigger, you draw a card, and you activate that trigger effect for every lock tune you have, which you're only going to have 1 lock tune anyway. So you get 10k power ideally, and you end up on 23k power. It has to be a draw or critical trigger, by the way. You can't use with heals or with over triggers or stands. So you do that, you get your 23k base for the rest of the turn, and you've now got a bit more hand. This card can also help you with generating force markers, which is another reason why I kind of like this combo. So what you'd do is you'd use the base Himiko, which we're playing 4 copies of, and you'd apply the effect of Himiko to get triggers at least 2 times. Then you'd ride the reverse ending to turn to generate the extra force marker, and then we get to your turn 4, which ideally you're going to be surviving your opponent's turn 3 anyway, because this deck can sort of defend itself a bit. Then on your turn 4, you would ride another grade 3, and you get your 3rd force marker. So it's a bit like Fortune in some ways. That can be very useful. In fact, that's kind of the core strength of the deck, is stacking up force markers, especially Force 1. You can use Force 2, but with Force 1 there's a combo you can do in this which is a bit more reliable in a way, because Force 1 markers, they do give your circle more power, which is kind of key to the kind of overall win con that you need, especially against certain decks like Grand Blue, which have hand traps that can kind of mess up your 3 attack pattern turns. And because it's not Regalia based, we have to rely on something else. So, well, not have to, you can build this with Regalia engine, but I'm trying to sort of explore a non-Regalia variant. So that's that with the Himiko side. Just remember though that when you use her skill, she eats up a lot of soul. So I'll get down to why that's important, but first we play full Glyphnir. So Glyphnir, this card is just a way to retrieve. It's Camelot's 1, which kind of hurts a bit, but it works on Vanguard Circle as well. So it puts a bit of stability into the deck as well. And sometimes you need this to find your Himikos. So that's important. And also it's a 20k swing, which is always nice. Good for early game rush if you want to do that too. Especially with a certain other card that can move it to soul later. Then there are 4 copies of Repler. So Repler is good with Himiko, because basically if your opponent's Vanguard is grade 3 or greater, you can copy the triggers from one of your units. So ideally you just give the triggers to your Vanguard, which is Himiko in this case, and then you just copy those triggers. You're not always going to use this. Sometimes your opponent will be on grade 3 and then you just decide to Stride, or you might just use Himiko anyway. It's a bit of a weird one, but obviously if you choose Himiko's skill, then you can basically use reverse more reliably instead of having to rely on trigger luck, because you have to hit 2 triggers for that to work. Also, Repler is really good because she can cycle a trigger that you guarded with, or maybe put a drop zone manually. You can grab that trigger, put it into your soul, which then sets up Himiko. And with Himiko, because the base form takes 1 trigger already out of your soul, the reverse also takes another trigger out, so you have to maintain your triggers. 3 copies of Camel, so I'm not playing 4 because this card is kind of easy to hit anyway in Genesis, because you do soul charge a bit, and it's more for your late game anyway. And often you're going to be limited on CB anyway, but funny enough, there are some gimmicky plays you can actually do to get this card back. Obviously G guarding and soul charging, or cards like Apple Witch Cider, which can soul charge as well from your hand, and obviously cards like Orange Witch, or even Repler when you call it. So Apple Witch Cider, this card is really good for an on boost, because the on boost gets you the soul charge 2, so you can use it from turn 1 of the game if you open this, and that can in the long term build up a lot of soul because it leads to a final finisher play. And the other thing is as well is that the Force marker, the reason why we like the idea of using Force 1 is because Kamar is a 9k base. So this is pretty weak compared to Seer Yggdrasil. So the Force 1 helps to make numbers that are actually going to force some sort of defense from your opponent. And then when you're calling more units, they're always going to have that extra 30k power. So that's always good to have as well. And furthermore, you can bounce this back to your hand as well, but you only get to Soul Charge 1 when you do that. That's just something to consider. Maybe if your opponent's high rolling you and you're worried about defending, then you bounce it to your hand then and there. Next, with Orange Witch, we have 4 copies. So this is good with, as mentioned, I did Glyphnir. It can be shoved into Soul, so if you do want to rush with Glyphnir for 20k power, you can always use Orange to then put into your Soul and then leave your Vanguard as the only attack target, which can be handy at times. And it also helps with soul charging a trigger, so in the early game you might decide to call a trigger and rush with the trigger and then just shove into soul and draw, just because you haven't found a way to soul charge a trigger. This is still one way to do it, but you have to remember that this is a battle phase skill, so you have to do this before your turn 3 Himiko player. So ideally you do this on turn 1 or 2. And then we've got 4 copies of Skull. So Skull is a grade 3 searcher. So unlike my witch deck profile where I had the witch card called the Fixers, because I'm not really searching for witches and sorcerers anymore, I put in Skull so I can add grade 3, so there isn't as much plussing for that reason in the early game. But there is the grade 3 searcher, and it helps you to find your copies of Himiko as well, so you can ride Himiko and then ride Himiko reverse on turn 3, which is the big play of the deck, and obviously have a good sustainable long game. Then 2 main deck copies of Lading, so this is a bit of a mix and match with Chamomile, because again you're not always going to have Counter Blast, but then again even if you have Counter Blast you can always use Glyphnir to fish this out as well. And then there are gimmick plays, like I mentioned earlier, you can use Repler to soul charge Chamomile. You can always do that mid battle with Lading. You can have Lading call out Repler, and then Repler can inherit the triggers that maybe you've got from your Vanguard or something, but then you can also soul charge your Chamomile. So that's a line of play you can do. So there are multiple lines of play in this deck, with Jagdagna, which is the Strata deck, which we'll go to in a second. So the idea is you're going to be calling cards mid-battle for your finisher turn. Then we play 3 Stride for the crits, so we can stride with them, especially for the turn 4 play. 4 copies of the Witch's Finisher Aroma, because we have some grade 2 witches like Kamar and Repler as well, so it's a mulligan critical basically. Think of it like that Banshee crit or Psychic Bird, in that you're trading a dead card in the early game for something that might be a bit more useful, but you're also soul charging as well with this and milling a drop zone, so that can also be an engine as well. And you're also playing grade 1 witches too, so that helps with that as well. Then 1 of the generic over trigger, because the Keta one's risky, you can deck yourself out, and with Orange Witch you can always put the over trigger on the bottom of the deck. The play doesn't really come up that much because this isn't really a mass soul charge deck, and you end up just leaning onto other lines of play. The thing is you're kind of relying a bit more on other factors at this point, so it's not going to come up quite as easily as you may think, but it's there, and it takes away the risk of the overtrigger. Besides, we're not playing the grade 3s anyway for the main beaters, so we're not even getting the twin drives in this deck, so it's not as valuable either there. We have 4 Kushinada, the draw perfect guard, and then they're in different sleeves because I have this in my Regalia deck at the moment and I don't own more than 4, so 4 of the grade 3 heal triggers. And then if we move on to the G-Zone, we have 2 copies of Jagdagna. So this is actually a bit of a rushed G-Zone. This isn't really properly completed, but I think this is a good way to kind of start for now, and then you can tweak based on your game experiences. So Jagdagna is the main finisher. It's worth playing 2 just in case, because you're not always going to finish on the first one. The game can go long, that is if you're surviving. So that's just something to bear in mind. Jagdagna has an on attack Soul Charge 4. Well, not Soul Charge 4, it's more like Soul Charge 1 of every different grade, which tends to be 4 if you're playing things right. And it gains 10k at the end of turn. So end of turn, kind of key if you're playing Regalia, but this isn't a Regalia deck, and it's just an attempt to try and make something spicy with a different gens deck, but it will never be as good as Regalia, because I think this card is actually way better than Regalia. And the whole 10k until end of turn is kind of one of the reasons, but also just restanding is also good with it. So this card is really nice because if your opponent drops a good shield, you can just pop that shield like a G-Guard or something. Obviously now we've got some Perfect Guard G-Guardians, so it's not going to be as great against decks like Luard, for example. But it can be good against other things out there. So that's just something to bear in mind. And the soul charging is really useful because if you're not quite as comfortable with the soul, you can always end up basically building your soul size, and then you have even more soul to blast out. It's free as well, there's no counter loss cost, so it can't be damage denied, which is also nice. And you're also selectively soul charging from drops, so Kamar can also be retreated. You can reuse your Kamar as well, so if you called one Kamar before this card attacked, and then you call over Kamar, and then you can soul charge one more Kamar back in, which is another reason not to really max 4, because it's so easy to recycle anyway as well, even if you do find that you have the Counter Blast to spare. So that's the main finisher. Then we've got 2 Marduk. I don't know if you really need 2 though, and to be fair, if you use Himiko, you have lesser chance that you'll be able to use this card to skill anyway, because Himiko's basically neg 6 soul. But we've got Marduk here anyway for times when you would rather go Marduk, or if you do have to somehow get 12 soul, which is again super unlikely because we're not even playing Crew in this list. Although you can play Crew, it is another close contender, and I did sometimes test it from time to time. Obviously though, I didn't have much time because I was too busy with the Springfest. So this was actually developed during the Springfest season. I kind of worked on it a little bit on the side, but that was more so just me kind of feeling a bit bored of playing Regalia all the time. I just wanted to like theorycraft something else. So it's still a little bit in the early stages, but I don't think there's really much more to go because it's not Regalia. Until the Taro unban happens, then your best bet is to play Regalia if you want to play a more serious Genesis deck. So Marduk is here, and it inherits triggers as well, so if you used Himiko with it, you can pull that off as well, which is pretty nice. And then another thing to remember is that reverse isn't a soul blast cost, so in some cases if you can't stride, you can just use reverse, and then you most likely have the soul for Marduk game, because reverse soul charges your field whenever you're calling things. Whenever you're rewriting. So reverse is very nice for that reason. And as mentioned earlier, like Orange Witch Valencia, Apple Witch, they can kind of retreat. So you can avoid negging at the same time as well, but they also do soul charge. So the deck does kind of take into account the idea of having more cards in soul as you're doing the rewrite. And Himiko as well, riding is a +1 soul. And then we've got 2 copies of Amarilla. So this is a big stride, obviously, because it's easy to use. It's first stride, it builds a lot of soul, it draws cards. It's very nice if you just want to think about playing into long game. It's there as well. Vanguard, an option basically. It stacks triggers, so you can Himiko reverse quite easily with this. Iris, 1 copy, just to have an easy soul charge 3 if you don't need that much shield. Dismal if you want to protect your rear guards. Then there's 1 copy of Gloria. So this is there to just prevent the deck out a little bit as well and have big shield. 1 ear, big shield again, also does a lot of soul charging. 4 different grades, it's a bit like Jack Dagna. Then there's 4 copies of the Sky Enforcing Light Dragon. So this card here can -2 crits for the rest of the turn on the units. So it also soul charges cards, so you can soul charge 3 total with this, which kind of makes it into a bit of Iris, but you have to soul charge from hand or field, so you are losing cards. But it's very good if you need it for important defense plays, because there are decks that can do like multiple restands and inherit crits. It's also good against over triggers. So because it tackles the crits, it means you don't have to worry about power anymore. So it's a very good G-Guard. It's very costly, but it just helps in unwinnable situations otherwise. So I'm glad it exists. It's really good, and it's not compromising on your soul charge G-Guards either, because you're still getting soul. It just means you can't choose the ones in your drop zone. Then we've got Tagwood, which is there as well as a 25k shield, easy to build kind of soul if you have the same name in your drop zone as the unit in your field. And then we've got Hana Satsuki, which is basically if you have the same card name in your soul as one on the field, it gets 10k shield. So you've got a G-Guard for every different situation, just to kind of have a bit of flexibility. Half of it are G-Guards, and then the other half are G units basically. So that's pretty much it for the Jagdagna Himiko deck profile. So I think that's pretty much it. I think, like, yeah, there's basically, you've just got this Himiko here. That's what you'd normally do. You just have Himiko. Maybe you have like a bunch of soul. Well, you should be having soul. And then ideally you just go Soul Blast 6. Crit is nice because you can do pressure and you can force your opponent to drop key guardians as well. So you just do that, put this on the bottom of your deck, and then this Himiko, basically you just give loads of crits to it. Then you can have Repla if you want, so that she can inherit the trigger effects. So you do some big numbers. You have 2 Replas, even better. Glyphnir can also fish these out as well. So you can do quite a bit of pressure with that. And then of course when you end your turn, you just Superior Ride by soul charging stuff. But obviously if you have something like Apple or Orange Witch already there, you can just put these to the soul so that you're not just negging for no reason. And you can use that to soul charge another few cards. And then well, you can keep on the field, or if you want to just do soul charge 1, you could do soul charge 1 and then just bounce to hand. And then you find that when reverse is condition of requiring 1 or more cards per soul, then of course you've got just the 1 left over, so you just jump in with that reverse and you don't really waste your rare cards in the way because of that. So very good for that as well. Some other things as well we could go through as well as that. So you can see here how the soul's building up. When you go into your finisher turn, of course, be a bit smart about this, because if your opponent's still on low damage, I would probably avoid going to Jagdagna, because Jagdagna's not as good if your opponent's on low damage. It's better if your opponent's on high damage. Jagdagna doesn't also plus either. He's just a guard breaker, so if you're not actually doing anything to gain from that turn, then you've missed out on using Amaruda, who can draw 2, or Himiko, who can combo with draw triggers or something like that, if you have draw in yourself. So there is a risk to using Jagdagna. You have to use Jagdagna effectively. But once you start building that soul, then you can do a lot of pressure. Amaruda can also do a lot of soul charging as well. So the next bit is just going through some other card options you could also run. So Jeering Dragon, if you want to prevent deck out, but also with Witch of Oranges, you can also use this to get multi-attacks as well, if you want to play it like that. Obviously it's very gimmicky. You can use Kroot as well. Kroot can do a lot of soul charging, so he's quite good as well as an option. He's a very close like contender in this deck, I think, as well to play. And then we've also got Varatrum, which is there if you ever need it for certain matchups. It's also just future-proof to be very good in general, because if there's ever a problem rear guard, you can always just play this in your deck as well. Obviously you have to cut stuff out, so that can be a bit painful. I think the Witch playstyle is a little bit easy to run this in, I felt anyway. And then we've got also Seer Yggdrasil and Norn. So Seer and Norn, obviously much better if you just play Regalia, so and you have Resign Vanguard as well, which is even more pressure, so your opponent actually, usually people have multiple PG or pseudo PG cards in this game now. Like every good deck has the ability to draw into that, so I would never kind of bet on just one Vanguard swing and then just think that you're doing actual pressure with 1 crit rearguard multi-attacks, because, or not even multi-attacks, because you have to bear in mind as well, the multi-attacks are only triggered when your opponent attempts to guard. So if your opponent has no guards and they're low damage and you just swing with Stride, they use a PG, okay, technically you can get a multi-attack against the PG, you just don't stop the PG effect. But then you have like 2 rear guards, and they're kind of quite weak anyway, because a lot of Genesis rear guards are weak. So oftentimes they will be weak cards, especially if you're not on Himiko as your Vanguard, because that's an opportunity cost in and of itself. And even like a Hime is a good card, but it's a grade 3, so there's that too. Glyphnir and Repla have a little bit of a buff, but it's not that much. It's very weak, so it's kind of awkward in that case. So yeah, it's very easy for your opponent to survive if, say, they're on 2 damage. I wouldn't bother using Jagdagna in this situation. But obviously Regalia, it's a bit easier because they're going to restun anyway. So at some point in the turn, the opponent's definitely going to have to guard. So yeah, that's just something important to be aware of if you're planning how to use Jagdagna, is to always think about the fact that your opponent can just tank stuff, and if you don't get crits, it's even worse. So that's pretty much it for the deck profile anyway. So yeah, just stay tuned for more. I will bring out some more profiles. It's just been a bit of a hectic bit of time, and I just wanted to get this one out because it was something I did touch for a little bit, but then obviously I put it to the side. But yeah, just something to kind of keep the content kind of coming out as I'm still finding time to work on some other things as well. Until then, I'll see you later. Goodbye.